Again, like I said, everything will be and is already readily accessible to you on the Counseling Department website. Under presentations on our website, you can find everything that you need. So with no further ado, it is my honor to introduce to you tonight our two presenters, two of our very own school counselors, Mrs. Capozzi and Ms. Cahill, who will lead us into the presentation.
So the content of tonight's presentation, as you're well aware, is the college application process. But we also want you, as we also told your children, to know that we recognize that students will select from a variety of post-secondary options, one of which is college, but might also include other plans, such as a gap year or the military or employment or a trade school. And we are ready and able to work with your children on those plans also. So we hope that you will encourage them to just let their counselor know if they're thinking about college, if they're thinking about something other than college. We're really happy to assist them in that planning as well. Tonight's presentation, we will first talk about the types of admission policies. We will talk about the different components of the application process. We have some miscellaneous but important reminders, and we'll also touch on scholarships and financial aid. As Mrs. Smith said, we did go into a great depth of detail with your students on September 10th. Our goal for the presentation tonight, our goal for what we'd like you to focus on, is really the overview of the college application process for your child, so that you feel comfortable with it and that you can also be a source of support to them at home, as we are available to support them during the day. So you may have heard us talk before about the fact that this is a student-driven process. And what we mean by that is that we are really wanting to empower your student to be responsible for their own college applications, for them really to be at the front of this process and taking ownership over both the selecting of their schools through the college applications. In order for them to do that, they need to utilize their counselor and the resources that we have here. So it's important that they utilize the counseling department when they need additional support. They also will need to utilize various technologies, and we've referenced some of them here for you. The counseling department website, where, for instance, you can download the senior mechanics packet that they received, or your child can if they've misplaced it, where you will also find this presentation this evening. The Common Application, a link to Naviance, and then understanding that college and university admissions websites are going to be an important resource in this process as well. So you've probably reviewed the different types of admission policies previously, but we want to refresh your mind as they come, as they will be coming up shortly for your child. So we're just going to go through them quickly here. Regular decision is the type of admission policy where the student will apply by a specified deadline and receive a decision by April 1st. There is no restriction on that type of application in terms of what other applications the student can complete through regular decision. Early decision is that binding agreement where the student will apply usually by November 1st or November 15th, and they will receive a decision usually by December 15th. This is a binding agreement, and if the student is accepted through early decision, they are obligated to attend that school. So this is obviously a serious commitment that the student is making. And it's really important that the student involve their school counselor in this conversation so that we can make sure the student understands the obligation and that it's an appropriate choice for them. You can also only apply to one school through early decision 1. And so when we're talking to your student about the seriousness of this obligation, this contract, there are 3 considerations that we want them to focus on. The first being that it's really important that going into their senior year, their transcript be in really solid condition. They should feel good about the work they did junior year. they've got nothing left to prove. They've accomplished what they wanted to accomplish at the end of junior year, because the time frame of the early decision application is such that senior year grades will typically not play a role in that process. So they won't be able to demonstrate strength during the first part of their senior year to enhance their application in early decision. The same goes for their standardized testing. They might have the opportunity to take an additional test if they're applying early decision in September or October, but by and large, they want their standardized testing to kind of be finished going into this application season. The second consideration is really that your child have fallen in love with one school, that they have a dream school that they want to attend more than any other school, and that school also must offer an early decision policy. But it's really important that the student who's considering early decision have a dream school. For some students, they can't ever narrow it down to just one school, and that's fine and normal, but it probably means they're not ready to apply early decision. And then the last consideration is really to do with finances. And that is, as a family, you need to be really comfortable with your ability to pay for the school that your child is considering through early decision. It might be possible to be released from an early decision contract if the financial aid package you received was significantly less than you were expecting. But you really don't want your child to be in that position. It is complicated and heartbreaking. So as a family, if your child is considering early decision, you really need to be comfortable with the cost of that school. We get a lot of questions about whether or not a financial aid package may be altered by your decision to apply early decision. The notion being that perhaps if the school knows you're obligated to attend, do they somehow diminish your financial aid awards because of that? And the answer is no. Your financial aid package is your financial aid package based on the algorithm that that school is using. And with the use of net price calculators that are now required on all financial aid websites, that process is fairly transparent. You should be able to get a good estimate of your out-of-pocket expense. What you may be giving up in regards to financial aid through early decision is the ability to compare multiple financial aid packages among different schools and perhaps steer your student in the direction of the best value. Because you won't have that ability to compare financial aid packages, your student will be obligated to attend the school that they've applied to and been accepted at through early decision. So that was early decision. Early action is another early arrangement, but it's not binding. A student is going to apply in November, usually receive a decision in December or January, but they are not obligated to attend through early action. In single choice, or sometimes called restricted early action, this is again a non-binding arrangement. The student is not obligated to attend, but the school that has developed a single choice early action policy is restricting the student's ability in some way to apply early to other institutions. This is really just a small handful of schools at this point, so it's something that most students won't encounter, but if your student does, these policies are specific to the institution, and they really need to check the fine print on each school's website if they are considering a restricted or single choice early action. Priority or preferred deadlines should be utilized for full consideration of whatever application the student is completing, whether that be admission or housing or financial aid. When your student sees a priority or a preferred deadline, they want to utilize that deadline. Rolling admissions you can think of as a first come, first serve kind of policy. Large public state institutions would be good examples of schools that might offer rolling admissions. And open admissions is a policy where a high school diploma or GED is really the requirement for admission. Community college would be a good example of an institution with open admissions. So now we'll talk about the components of the application process. And you can think of a completed college application as really broken into three parts: the counselor piece, the teacher piece, and the student piece. Now you may notice there is no parent piece up here. That is not because you don't have an important role in this process. You have a vital role in this process, and your role, as is ours, the counselor, is to support your child in this process. But in terms of responsibilities for the applications, you in fact do not have one. So why? Why are we focusing on this right now? Well, it's because in under a year, your child is going to be living independently on a college campus as a college student. And we want them to be prepared for that. And in order to be prepared, we want them to practice now problem solving. We want them to practice decision making. We want them to feel the responsibility of something so when they are a college student, they feel competent and equipped to fulfill that obligation and that responsibility. And we want them to practice those skills now when we're here, when we can guide them and support them so that they're ready when they get there. So it really is critically important that your student be responsible for their college applications and that they are really the driving force in this process. The counselor's piece involves verifying and sending the student's official transcript. It involves writing and sending the counselor letter of recommendation. A school profile goes with each of the official transcripts, and that gives some context to the college or university about our community, about our school, our academic offerings, things like that. It will be posted on the counseling department website also, so you can review that if you want to see exactly what is in the school profile. And then an electronic secondary school report form also goes. We emphasize to your child that we don't need any additional paper forms. We can access all of the forms electronically, so it's not necessary for your child to print and supply their counselor with any school report forms. The teacher's piece is to write and send recommendation letters after students have made the request of them and provided them with the necessary information. Necessary information is really going to vary by teacher, so we have encouraged your student to be in communication with their teachers about exactly what the teacher would like from them in order to be able to write the most effective letter of recommendation. And then the student's piece is to turn in completed senior packet. Part A was due in June. If your child hasn't completed that, please encourage them to get that in. If they don't remember or they're not sure, please encourage them to verify with their counselor. And Part B of the senior packet is due September 20th. It's the student's responsibility to provide information for the teacher recommendations, to pay for their transcripts online, to create a common application account if they will be using the common application, to request that SAT and ACT scores be sent to colleges. And when we say that, we mean directly from the testing organization. They're going to send their standardized test scores directly from either College Board or ACT. They do not appear on the Ridge transcript. The only way to get an official test score sent is through the testing agency. So we emphasize to your child that that's part of the process that they need to undertake. Their responsibility is to complete their applications online and request their transcripts through Naviance. Prior to requesting their transcripts, the student does need to turn in both parts of the senior packet. They need to pay for their transcripts online. They were given detailed instructions on how to do this in their senior packet, and the link will also be in this presentation. And then they will need to have their senior meeting with their counselor. The senior meeting is a meeting that the counselor will schedule, and it is between the counselor and the student. And we review your student's individual college application process with them. They have our undivided attention, where we review their transcript, their college list, their standardized testing, their application strategy, any questions that they've brought to the table. We ask that you please be patient with us. Every counselor has upwards of 60 seniors, and almost all of your children will end up with a November 1 deadline. We will meet everyone's deadline, but it does take us a while to get through 60 senior meetings. We know that your child is eager to meet with us as we are eager to meet with them and talk about the details of their process, and we will, but it's just going to take us a little bit of time to get through 60-plus seniors. While they're waiting, certainly if they have questions, if they're feeling nervous, if they need support, please encourage them to reach out to us. You can reach out to us. We're accessible. It just takes us a while to have all of the meetings. And we gave them a checklist in their packet of all of the items that they can work on completing while they're waiting for their senior meeting, in addition to working on their applications. A student is not precluded from submitting their applications before having their senior meeting. If they need feedback on something, they can certainly be in touch with their counselor if they haven't yet had their meeting. Paying for your transcripts. There is a $7 flat fee per student for transcripts. That covers all of the transcripts that need to be sent for the entire year, including paper transcripts and scholarships that might need to be sent. It's paid online with a credit card, and we've referenced the direct link as well as the step-by-step instructions for how to take care of that transcript payment. In Naviance, your child may receive an error message. We all desperately wish Naviance gave us the ability to customize this error message to reflect the actual problem at hand. It does not, and so the error message might read, your parent or guardian must give you consent for you to request transcripts. That is not actually the case. One of three things is probably going on if your child is receiving this message. Your child may not have turned in their senior packet, your child may not have paid for their transcripts, or your child may not have had their senior meeting. Those three things need to happen before your child can request transcripts. Until then, your child might see this error message. Also, please note that transcripts can only be requested through the student Naviance account. So if you and your child have been sharing the same login, now is the time that you need to make sure that your child is working in their own username and password, because only the student account can sign up for college visits and request transcripts. So if your child is trying to request a transcript and the function isn't there, you might be actually in the parent account, and just send us an email and we can help you sort that out. On the topic of transcripts, we are happy to let you know that unofficial transcripts we expect to be pushed out to the Genesis portal later this week. So for those of you who've been wanting to know how you can obtain those, they'll be in Genesis later this week. And your student will also be given a hard copy during their senior meeting. Your student may encounter one of two main electronic application platforms, the Common Application being really the oldest and probably most common of the two. So if your student is using the Common Application to apply to a school, they will create their account at commonapp.org. They will fill out the basic information and education section. They will add schools to their Common App list. They will complete the FERPA waiver in Common App and then match their Common App account to their Naviance account. They have step-by-step directions in their resource manual that includes screenshots. So I know that we provided this to you in a list here. They have detailed information on how to do these steps, and these are the steps they need to complete for Naviance to be able to send their documents electronically. So that's why we've referenced it here, but they have a great deal more information in their packet. The Coalition application is the second main platform that your student might encounter. There are 3 schools that utilize the Coalition exclusively. It's the only way to apply to the University of Maryland, the University of Washington, and Virginia Tech. So if your student is applying to one of those schools, they will need to get set up with the Coalition. When using the Coalition app for a non-exclusive school, meaning a school that takes the Coalition, but also takes the Common App, the student needs to discuss this with their counselor if they've decided to use the Coalition app for a school when they don't have to make sure that the proper settings in Naviance are such so that their electronic documents don't get held up. So as long as we know that they're using the Coalition, when they don't have to, meaning outside of these 3 schools, we can set up Naviance so that there aren't any problems. But if we don't know, we can't ensure that that's set properly. So we have asked your children to please let us know if they're using the Coalition app for a school outside of these 3. We also encourage them, for students that were applying to the University of Delaware, we encourage those students to in fact use the Common application, not the Coalition application. And that has to do with an actual delivery setting that the University of Delaware has through Naviance. They can use the Coalition app. We will need to mail their documents. So again, as long as we know, we can take appropriate action on that. But it's especially important if your child is applying to the University of Delaware with the Coalition app that we know about that. So Ms. Cahill will now take us through standardized testing.
Okay, so as Mrs. Capozzi mentioned, standardized test scores do not appear on the Ridge High School transcript. So as a result, they will have to send their standardized test scores from either the College Board website or the ACT website directly. This, of course, is for schools that require standardized test scores to be sent. There are test optional schools. If you want a list of test optional schools, they can be found under www.fairtest.org, which your students are probably familiar with as well. So those schools are schools that do not necessarily require test scores from students. The reason I say do not necessarily is there are some schools on Fair Test which have a GPA requirement or some other requirement that a student needs to meet in order to not have to submit test scores. There are also some schools that require test scores anyway for certain types of majors, for example. So it's important that your student be aware of their school's standardized testing policy before deciding whether or not they need to send their scores. We did provide your students in the senior packet that Mrs. Capozzi mentioned, the senior mechanics packet that we handed out to them last week on the 10th. We gave them a copy of this chart that we have projected up here for you that shows you upcoming test dates. It is okay if your student is not done taking their standardized testing. There are upcoming dates available to them to sit for either the SAT or the ACT. So those will be available to them if they need to do that. If they have questions about which score to submit, perhaps they've taken both an SAT and an ACT, they should really include their counselor in the conversation so that we can help to ensure that they are sending their best score. Sometimes it's confusing to them about whether they've performed better on one than the other, so it's important to make sure that they're sending the correct one. Okay, as I've mentioned, we don't send test scores from Ridge High School, and it is their responsibility to send them directly to the colleges, so we've provided them and also you in this packet with the websites that they need to go to in order to send the official score report. There are some schools that no longer require official test scores during the application process. So if your student says the words, "I can self-report my test scores," they might actually be correct about that. There are some schools that no longer require an official score report, in which case the schools may be asking your student to self-report their test scores. That is not the same thing as filling out the Common application or the Coalition application and choosing to disclose that information on the application. So on the Common app, it says, would you like to provide us with your standardized test information? That is not the same thing as self-reporting. So it's very important that your student understand that, and that's something that's relatively new, which is why I wanted to mention it to you as well, because if you have an older student, you might say to yourself, no, you can't have an unofficial test score. There are some schools that do allow them to do that, but it's important that they clearly read their policy and understand whether or not they're required to follow up with official test scores or not. We tell students that there's a 3 to 5 week turnaround time to send standardized test scores, which students have a lot of trouble understanding because in the day and age of everything being electronic, they don't really understand why it is that they need to give some lead time. So the reason for that is that if they order that their scores be sent by either College Board or ACT, College Board or ACT might send out a large crop of scores to a particular school. Maybe they do it weekly, for example, and maybe they are requesting it after they've already sent out those scores for that week. Perhaps they send them on Mondays and your student has requested that score be sent to, for example, University of Delaware, and it's a Wednesday. So they might not even send them until the following week. University of Delaware then may have a policy where they only go in and download those large score reports every other week. So this is the reason why we ask them to give them lead time. It is not because the scores are not sent electronically or because that they're not really available. They are, but the question is whether or not it will actually be joined to their file in time to meet their deadline. And students are often checking portals and looking to make sure that all of their information has been received by the deadline. And if for some reason the school has not yet downloaded and matched to their file, that can cause a lot of anxiety for your student, which is why we have recommended to them that they give a little bit more lead time. In terms of completing applications, we always tell them it's important to start early. That does not mean that they should have completed all of their applications by now, or that they need to pick a particular date on which they have to have everything submitted by. It just means that we don't want them to be rushing and, God forbid, there is some kind of an error message or some kind of an issue that they're encountering, and it's November 1st at 11:59 p.m., and now they can't submit. Or in the past, we have a ice storm the week before November 1st. For those of you who were lucky enough to have a senior that year, that was a good time. Okay. Following direction, that's probably 9/10 of the application process is to follow the directions. So your students should not be sending gobs more materials than they're looking for or less materials than they're looking for. Their deadlines are real deadlines. So we all understand that here at Ridge High School we have some really kind faculty and counselors where when you are supposed to hand in your senior packet on June 3rd and it's June 10th, we're like, thanks so much for giving that to us, we'll still take it. They don't do that. So it's important that they understand that a deadline is a deadline, and that may be the first time that your student is encountering a hard deadline. So it is important that they follow the directions, that they meet the deadlines for all of their materials. As Mrs. Capozzi mentioned earlier, we will meet ours. We've been doing this for years and we know what we're doing. This is probably the first time they've ever done this. So it's very important that they are following the instructions, and if they have questions, that they reach out to either us, or if it's something that's really more directly applicable to the school, that they ask the school specifically if there's something that they're confused about. They should allow time for writing and reviewing. So many of you may know that the Common Application has a main essay that students write. So they're going to be submitting that essay to every school to which they apply. So if they use the Common App to apply to 10 schools, all of those 10 schools will get that particular piece of writing. However, schools may ask for supplementary writing. It may be specific to that particular school. So for example, they might say, why Bucknell? Or they might say, please tell us a little bit about your major of interest and why you are interested in that, and why this particular program here at University of Scranton will assist you in achieving your goals. By the way, I just completely made up those two questions. I have no idea if those exist this year. So don't go home and tell your kid there's a supplement for Scranton. I have no idea. The bottom line is that they need to make sure that they are aware of whether there are additional pieces of writing that they will have to be responsible for. And that is because this is a question that is asked of them directly from the school. So they should be taking their time to answer that question and answering it thoughtfully. Not every school is your first choice school, right? So you're going to have a list of schools that are going to range from the ones that you're really interested in to the ones that you're like, I would go there, or the ones that you're like, I will go there if I really have to go there, but the other ones are really my first choice. But when you write your supplement questions, you don't write them with that in mind, right? You write them as if you want to attend that particular school. You also do not tell Bucknell why you'd like to attend University of Delaware. So it's very important that you edit your essays before you submit them. So we try to explain this to students and explain that these are the kinds of mistakes that happen when you're rushing, right? We've all been there. You send an email and you're like, and I just realized that I sent it to the wrong person, right? Because you have similar contacts in your emails. I actually did that the entire day. The other day, I sent it to the entire building instead of to my NHS students. So we do it too. But the bottom line is that the less those things happen in the admissions process, the less hysterical your senior will be during their application process. So it is really important for you to encourage them to plan ahead and to edit and to spend the time. And listen, I have 2 children, and one of them is approaching the age where, well, I actually know nothing. I've known nothing for several years, but she's approaching this age where you guys are all sitting here thinking to yourself, yes, we know nothing either. So it's important that sometimes you let us do that for you, right? If you say to them, you've got to edit, and they're like, I am not letting you read this. Okay, cool. So you're not the one who reads it. So who is? Maybe it's their English teacher. Perhaps it's their counselor. Perhaps it's an older sibling that actually does, in fact, know something. So whoever that person is that they trust, Let them help them. It's okay that it's not you. We don't want you to start World War III in your house. It's just important that you make suggestions that work in your particular situation and for your particular family. And if you need to send up a flare, just email us and tell us that we need to meet with them so that we can review something. Save often. There still is that annoying save feature in applications. It's not quite as awful as it was when we were doing this whole process, but it still exists. And thankfully, there's no typewriters now, so it's better than it was when we were doing this whole process. Okay, requesting transcripts using Naviance. Mrs. Capozzi mentioned that this is the mechanism by which we send transcripts, so your student does have specific instructions on what they need to do in order to request their transcript. They hand us their senior package, so we have an idea of what their overall list is, but we actually don't send documents until they request them. So they go through the process that Mrs. Capozzi mentioned, where they pay for their transcripts online, they submit their senior packets, part A and B, and they have their meeting with their counselor. We tell them, you need to request your transcripts. Most of the time that happens. Sometimes they forget that that's the final part of the process, and then we're getting close to November 1st, and they haven't requested their documents be sent. We're usually pretty on top of them to make sure that people that we know who have a November 1st deadline have made those types of requests. But don't be surprised if you might be CC'd on an email that says something like, I've noticed that you haven't requested your transcripts. So please understand that we are watching and we are that fail-safe to make sure that we try not to miss anything, but it is their responsibility to go in and request those transcripts when they want to send them. Some students do change their deadlines. They might change, for example, and say, well, I was going to apply early action, but I'm really not prepared and I want more time and I'm going to apply regular decision. That's fine. And then they can communicate that to us, but our expectation is that they're using the deadlines that they submitted to us. For that same reason, if they say they were planning on applying January 1st, and that's their absolute first deadline that they've provided their counselor, changing to November 1st is actually very significant to us because it means that we need to meet this new deadline that we didn't know about until potentially Halloween. So it's really important that you make sure that if your students are talking about things like, I think I might apply earlier than I originally said, it would be really nice if you could say, can you please give your counselor a heads up? Because that means they also need to meet your earlier deadline. So it is very important that we know that information. If they're going to delay, that's really up to them, but if they're going to apply earlier, we do need to know that. Information for early decision applicants. So Mrs. Capozzi mentioned earlier that early decision is binding, and for that reason, there is a contract for early decision. So for students who are applying through the Common Application, that contract is completed online with an electronic signature. We do ask those students that if they decide after they've met with us for their senior meeting to apply early decision, that they notify us. That is because the way this process works is that they apply through the Common Application, they indicate an early decision deadline in Common App and on Naviance, and then when they apply and we go to send their transcript, it triggers a pop-up screen for us to go ahead and complete our form, which is to sign off on their early decision agreement. So they don't have to give us any materials, we do it electronically. If, however, we send their transcript and then they decide to apply early decision, while they may change the decision type in Naviance and they may change it on the Common Application, when they submit it, we're not going back in to send anything. We've already sent the materials, so we don't get a pop-up that says, please sign the early decision agreement for your student electronically. We can go back in and recreate that message and do it, but we need to know that we need to go in. And if we are not aware that they're applying with that deadline, we won't know to do that. So we did tell them to please make sure that they let us know if they change their mind and decide to apply someplace early decision after we've already sent their transcript. They can check, by the way, to see whether their transcript has been sent in Naviance. They have the directions for that as well. For non-Common Application schools, there is still a printed form. So they sign, you sign, and then they bring it in to us for us to sign it. Because we want to make sure that they know on what date it was sent and what method it was sent, it's their responsibility to send it. So it's important that they find us in the building, we sign it, we give it back to them. We do not keep it and send it ourselves or put it with the rest of the application materials, which incidentally might have gone out before that already. So they are responsible for sending the early decision agreement if it's a printed copy because it is a non-Common Application school. Social media etiquette. So we all think this is really important, and I'm sure that you all echo the fears that we have as counselors for these students that their whole lives are now lived on social media, which of course we were lucky enough not to have to deal with. So what we tell our students is to assume that anything that they have posted any place in the universe out there on the internet, so whatever their electronic footprint is, that is something that is now out there. Even if they immediately delete it, it doesn't mean that somebody didn't see it before they immediately deleted it. So it's very important that they understand that not only can their peers see it, or potentially later employers, but also admissions reps may be able to see it. For the same reason that we Google somebody when we go to sit down in an interview, sometimes they do too. So it's very important to know that if students have something out there that they wouldn't want to share with their parent, their employer, or their grandparent, they should probably choose to get rid of that now prior to the time of applying. They should be using an appropriate email address to apply, whether that is their Bernard's BOE account or an account that they feel has an appropriate name, probably even one that reflects who they are. Please do not send emails on behalf of your student and then have your student as the signature line. College admissions counselors are really savvy, and they know that your male student doesn't have a female first name. So it's really important to make sure that they are the ones sending the communications, that they are the ones reaching out. This is one of the first times they may have had to draft emails or make phone calls to an adult. I think the further into the technology age we get, the less comfortable and confident students are with making phone calls and actually getting a human on the other side of the phone. So they may be worried, and you might want to fix that for them, like we all do, and plus it's like so much faster if you do it, right? Don't do that. They have to do this themselves now. They are going to college next year, as Mrs. Capozzi mentioned, and they're going to have to navigate these types of things on their own. Let them do it now in the safety of sitting there with maybe you being like, I'll write you a little note about, don't forget to ask about financial aid. But it's better to do it now than it is to have to do it when there is no safety net and no suggestion and no person to be like, listen, you actually did a great job on that phone call. So please make sure that you try to keep yourself from doing the things that maybe you've done in the past and let your students do them, because they are capable of doing it, and they will actually feel better after they've done it to know that they were able to do it themselves. We tell them that they must check their email frequently. I cannot tell you how many times I have to call down a student to say, I got an email from an admissions rep that they were missing something from you, and then I emailed you to tell you, and then it was like crickets. So if I'm not getting a response, I'm fairly certain they're not getting a response, and therefore I've now called you down, but I can do that. No college admissions rep is coming to Ridge High School to tell you that they are missing something. So it's very important that they check their email, and we really do try to emphasize that to them a lot. We also like to communicate with them during their senior year about things that we might remember or things that dawn on us, so it's important they're checking their email to get emails from us as well. Okay, resumes and additional information. It used to be that we had every student do a resume because they were probably going to upload it and send it to colleges. Now that has changed. Most likely they're not going to be doing that. They're doing their resume for their counselor so that we can see a really good one-page snapshot of what they've done throughout their 4 years here at Ridge High School. And the idea is that they then take that well-written resume that they've created and transpose that into the activities section of either the common application, the coalition application, or the specific school's application. However, there may be times when a student is uploading a resume or sending some sort of additional information. Perhaps they are an art major and they're uploading a portfolio. Perhaps they are a music major and they're able to upload an audition. However, it's very important that students are not sending things that schools don't want them to send, and it's also very important that your student know how that information is going to be evaluated. So for purposes, for example, of an art portfolio or a music audition, if they're simply sending it because this is something that they love to do in their spare time and they're sending it to say, look at my cool art that I do on the weekends, make sure that they're not sending that to the art department to be reviewed by the head of the department. It's important that they understand what schools want and whether or not it's going to be used as just sort of like extra information about what a cool person they are, or whether it's going to be used evaluatively. So that is something that they can really only find out by asking the individual schools. If I send you this type of information, can this just be something that enhances my application, or is this something that will be evaluated differently? So that is something that your students should ask of the various admissions offices before they send any additional materials besides what is asked of them in the application. In terms of senior year course changes, sometimes it is necessary to change a course, whether that is to change a level, to drop a course for a study hall if a student doesn't otherwise have one because they are feeling overwhelmed. If that is the case and we have already sent the transcript to schools, it's very important that your student realize that the reason we're telling them that they need to reach out to their schools to ask whether or not this is going to have any impact is because it can. We're sending a transcript to say this is what your student is taking. If that changes and the final transcript that we send does not match the original one, that could potentially be the basis for rescinding admission. So we are very careful to not make any changes for your student once we've sent the transcript before we've made sure that that is not going to have a substantial impact on the decision if one has already been rendered or the potential decision if one has not already been rendered. So please know that that's why we ask your student to communicate with the admissions offices before we make that type of a change. That is one of the reasons we also do not send transcripts extremely early in the year. Some of your students might be frustrated. How come my transcript can't go out September 1st? Okay, well, we're not even back here yet. But how come not September 15th? Well, for the same reason that I just said. Let's make sure that your classes are the ones that you feel comfortable and confident in before we send out your transcript. Because once we've done that, you have to then alert them if you're making a change, and it draws attention to that change. So there is a concerted reason why Ridge High School has the policies that we have that relate to schedule changes and that relate to when we begin to send transcripts, and that is one of the reasons. So for students that do make a schedule change, it is not the end of the world, but we do ask them to write each school explaining the course change, and then that way they don't have to worry about the end transcript not resembling the first transcript. Senior year grades. We automatically send first marking period grades to all of the schools, as well as first semester grades, which are also referred to as a mid-year report. So the first semester is called the mid-year report. Those are required by all schools, so we do have to send those. The first marking period grades are not required by every school. Some do want to see them, particularly schools that have an early decision process and the student is choosing to utilize that. They usually want to see first marking period grades. However, if your student has a rough start to the school year and decides to withhold those grades, there is a form that allows them to do that. If the school contacts the counselor and says, we'd like to see the first marking period grades, and your student is on the list of people who have withheld their grades, we will let them know before sending them, but we will have to send them if the school has asked for them because they may require them anyway. So just to understand that that is our internal form to say we will not send them without your permission if you don't want to send them, but if a school contacts us and it's the only way to move forward with the application process, we then leave it to your student to make a decision about whether to continue with the application process at that school and send those desired materials. By the way, they do not need to give us any additional forms to send either first quarter grades or first semester grades. We automatically do that to the schools to which they've applied. Okay, so for student athletes, if your senior is potentially a recruited athlete, they've probably already begun talking to their counselor and their coach about the fact that they needed to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center, which they probably have done by now, and that they need to create that account. They're also going to request transcripts using Naviance that will go to NCAA. So it's done the same way as it's done to request transcripts for a college, except that it goes to NCAA. They also have probably started to become familiar with the terminology core GPA, which is different than the Ridge High School GPA. It only includes certain classes, and it does unweight those courses. So it's important that the students are aware that there is a difference between the Ridge GPA and the NCAA core GPA, and we can help them to understand that further if they are a recruited athlete and have questions. Instant decision and interview days. One of the exciting things that we have here at Ridge High School is a really nice relationship with certain schools who are willing to come here and give our students some experience in interviewing and also some experience with getting actually a decision on the spot from that particular school. So if your students are applying to a school that does either an instant decision or an interview day, they have the opportunity to sign up for those. They have to do it at least 3 days before the school is going to be here, and we give them some criteria that they have to do beforehand. So we don't set them up for failure. We have some criteria that they need to meet in order to participate in those days. Instant decision means that they've already provided materials and that they will be given a decision on the spot. That decision is either going to be, yes, congratulations, welcome to this particular school, or it might be, we'd like some additional information, but we'd really like to sit down and talk to you today, and then we'll request that additional information in the future and render a decision. So the answer is never no on the spot. It's either yes or not yet. And then interview days are an opportunity to interview in person with an admissions rep, and then the decision follows usually a few weeks later, usually via email. It can also be a written response that you get in the mail. So again, there's required criteria that the students can review. The schools this year that are already set up to be here are all going to be here in December. The first one is University of Scranton, which is an interview day, not an instant decision day. They're here on December 4th. Rider University, which is here on December 5th. That is an instant decision day. Ramapo is here on December 10th. That's another instant decision day. Fairleigh Dickinson is here on the 11th for an instant decision, and Kane University is here on December 12th. So those are confirmed with dates. There may be additional schools, but those are the ones that we have confirmation about what materials the schools would like and what dates on which the instant decision or interview will take place. If your student has questions because they are applying to those schools and they want to know more about what this is, they can definitely see their individual counselor, and we can walk them through what they need to do before they participate in one of those days. Self-reported academic records. As I mentioned before, students may be allowed to self-report their test scores. Well, this is being able to self-report your transcript. So some larger schools do not want to receive documents from Ridge High School. Everything that they get from the student. So the application goes directly from the student, and the test scores come from the institution or potentially from the student if they're self-reported to that particular institution. Obviously, the essay comes from the student. They probably don't require letters if they're that large of a university. And then the self-reported academic record is the way that the school finds out what courses the student has taken and what grades they have gotten and what credits they've earned. So they take their transcript and they type in the courses, the grades earned, and the credits earned. That allows the colleges to manipulate that information however they want. Perhaps they calculate their own GPA, for example, or are looking for particular courses that have been completed, particular numbers of courses. So that allows them, when they're larger institutions, to manipulate a huge amount of data without having to type it in or scan it in themselves. So examples of schools that require the students to self-report their academic record are Rutgers, Pitt, University of South Carolina. There are some schools in Florida that do this as well. So there are quite a few schools that are beginning to follow suit with this because it does allow them to receive the materials a bit faster and also to get the data uploaded into their system in a way that makes sense for them rather than the way that makes sense for us in terms of the way that our transcript is viewed compared to maybe other schools. In order for students to complete this, they may need their state student ID number. They definitely need that for Rutgers. That SID is located on either their transcript or in Naviance, and we've given them the specific instructions on how they can find that, but it is on here just so that you understand that they can click on Naviance, click on their About Me page, they click on the account page, and then they will see their SID number. So that is different from the Ridge High School number. The Ridge High School number is shorter. College visits to Ridge High School. So we are beginning college visits tomorrow. So we are excited to start hosting college reps tomorrow. Not quite so early in the morning. I think our first one is 5th period tomorrow, Miami of Ohio. So tomorrow, today really, if your students are interested in any of the schools that are coming tomorrow, they should have printed their pass and had their teacher sign it so that that teacher knows that they will not be attending class that period because they will be going to a college visit, and that those college visits take place in the media center. The schedule of college visits is on Naviance. Students can only sign up for those using their student account. So as Mrs. Capozzi mentioned before, there is a difference in the functionality between the student account and the parent account in Naviance. Because you unfortunately don't get to go to the college visit at Ridge High School, you also don't get to sign up for the college visit at Ridge High School. So students have to do it through their student account. So again, they sign up on Naviance, they print their pass, they have their teacher sign it in advance, and then they come to the media center. Very often the person who is coming from that school is also the person who will be charged with reading your student's application. So we talk to them about the importance of making a good impression, asking great questions. Sometimes they even are lucky enough that there's only really a couple of students at the visit and they get to really have a personalized conversation with the admissions rep. This year, we also are hosting a college fair, as we have in the past, and it's going to be held on Thursday, October 10th. It's from 7 to 9 p.m. in the new gym. So it's an opportunity for your student to walk around and ask questions of admissions reps, perhaps get some last-minute questions answered for schools that perhaps they're interested in, maybe even add an additional school or two to their list if they find something that interests them. Interviews. So there are schools that offer interviews. Some of them are evaluative in nature, some of them are simply informative, some of them are done with alumni, some of them are done with staff members at that particular school. So it's important that your student be aware of what the interview policy is for the schools that they're applying to and make a decision about whether or not they're going to sign up for the interview and then find out whether or not it's evaluative or informative. We can give them some tips and some sample questions. So if they are interested, they can contact their counselor for that information. Documents and forms that we've gone over with your students that they may need during the application process. If your student has an IEP or a 504 plan and has a disclosed disability that the school is aware of, we cannot disclose that information to a college without a permission to disclose disability form. And that's really up to your student whether or not they want us to, but even if they do want us to, we're not permitted to do that without having a signed copy of this form. Teacher recommendation waiver forms, the teachers may ask that the students complete that in order to say that they are waiving their right to view their letter of recommendation. I know that there are some students and parents that panic when they hear, I have to waive my right to see my letter. It is extremely uncommon for a student to ever see a letter of recommendation in the application process. Ridge High School has a policy that does not allow us to release our letters of recommendation to students during the application process. So it's not part of the process that a student would ever see that letter. The only way, if they don't sign the waiver, that they would see the letter would be after they've been admitted to the school if they asked to see their file and there was no waiver on file. Again, what we've told your students is we don't have any reason to say anything negative about them. Our goal is to help them get where they want to go. So we are writing the most positive things that we can find about your student and making sure that anything that we do need to explain about something that might be difficult is something that is making your student comfortable. It's likely to be something that they've disclosed to us in their senior packet in terms of how they want to explain something, maybe a difficult grade, maybe a difficult year. So those are the types of things that we talk over with your student before we would even mention them in a letter of recommendation, and the same thing would go for their teachers as well. In their senior packet, they did have a form that allows us to disclose their transcripts, so you probably have signed that form already if your student has turned in senior packet Part B. So it was a permission to disclose the transcript form, and then at the bottom of it is the waiver for the counselor letter of recommendation. So if you haven't seen it yet, you will likely see it between now and Friday when their senior packet Part B is due. And I'm sure you'll all be going home saying, I haven't seen that yet, so where is that form? Okay, financial aid and scholarships. I would really encourage you, if you have never been to a financial aid night, to consider coming on Monday, September 23rd to the financial aid night. Disclaimer, it is at Bernard's High School. So if you come here, we will not see you because it's not here. So make sure you go to Bernard's that night if you are interested. We co-host it with Bernard's, so we do both the college fair with Bernard's and the financial aid night. We host the college fair, they host the financial aid night. So it is in their auditorium at 7 p.m. on Monday, September 23rd. I think it's really important to hear what they have to say about the best way to plan and the best way to understand how to answer some of the questions on the FAFSA. It can get confusing. The FAFSA form is, of course, the federal application for financial aid for students, and they will be filling that out this year. They will be filling it out earlier than if you have older students, you probably realize that that deadline has shifted. So it used to be that they filled it out in January of their senior year, now they're filling it out in October of their senior year. So that is one of the things that they're going to be filling out fairly soon, and it's important to know how to answer those questions. And also there's a parent section and there's a student section. So there are two different parts of the FAFSA form, and the students are required to fill out one portion and the parents fill out the other. There's also something called the CSS profile. The CSS profile is used by some schools to get some additional information that may not be available to them in the FAFSA. So it may gather information, for example, that is more relevant to the area of the country that you live, the cost of living, things like that. So it does gather additional information that the FAFSA may not provide to colleges. So you do have to check the financial aid website of the schools to which your student is applying, or really they do, in order to find out whether or not the FAFSA, and if they require the CSS profile, the student would have to do that in addition to the FAFSA. Every student really should complete a FAFSA, even if you do not believe that your student will be eligible for financial aid because you think you make too much money. They cannot be given a scholarship or an award of money if they do not have a FAFSA form on file. So if you don't like free money, then cool, don't fill out the FAFSA. But if you do, then you should probably consider completing the FAFSA before it's due. And the schools do set their own deadlines for when the FAFSA has to be submitted. That is not a Ridge High School deadline. That is individual to the particular colleges. Scholarships and special programs, we have a list on our Naviance page to allow students to get an idea of what scholarships and special programs may be out there. It is not comprehensive of every scholarship and special program. It is simply the things that we are aware of because they have come through our office. We have also told students about a program called Raise Me. At this point, that may not be as applicable to your current senior because this is a program where throughout the 4 years that they're in high school, they can upload certain information about themselves and make themselves eligible for something that we call micro scholarships, so small amounts of money that can be granted to them from specific colleges for maybe earning a particular award, doing a certain amount of community service, for example. But that is a time-consuming process because you have to start uploading things from freshman year on, and it does generate small increments of money, so it takes some time to do. And for students that are seniors, I believe the deadline is either vastly quickly approaching or maybe have just passed. So that may be something that your student has already started using, which is fine because we've been talking to them about it for a couple of years. But if not, don't panic because they are small increments of money and it may not be what they would have been awarded anyway when it comes to financial aid offers from the particular schools. And those offers would have subsumed this amount anyway. So in other words, it wouldn't be in addition to this particular amount. Okay, so if you're like me, you might want to check things off. So what types of things can I say that my student has already done? So hopefully, the first one is Senior Packet Part B. And if it's not, by Friday, you can hopefully check that off because it is due on the 20th. So they do need to turn in their Senior Packet Part B to their counselor. They should be providing their teachers any letter of recommendation materials that they may be asking for. They should go ahead and register for the SAT or the ACT if they still have to take another one or would like to take another one. And they should go ahead and go in and send their SAT or ACT scores to the schools to which they're applying, assuming that they are required by those schools. And they can also go in and pay the one-time transcript fee online so that that can all be done prior to meeting with their counselor. Again, we did give them in the packet information about the things that they can do prior to the time that we meet with them so that they can have an opportunity to get those things done. So one of the things that I want to leave you with is going back to what Mrs. Capozzi said about what is your role in this process. So I think the supporting role thing is important, and just as it's important for us, it's very important for you. This is stressful. It's stressful for your student. It's stressful for you. This is a big decision that they're going to be making, and probably the first time that they're really thinking about the idea of doing something that isn't as prescribed for them as what they've done prior. So this is a big decision, and it may be scaring them more than you realize. So that may be meaning that they're withdrawing a little bit. Maybe they don't want to talk about it with you. So this letter was written by parents of a senior who was applying to schools. In fact, he was applying to some really heavy hitter schools like Yale and Princeton and Brown, as well as some other schools. And he had laid all of the groundwork and done all of the work that he wanted to do in terms of achieving high standardized test scores, participating in various activities. He had done what he could do in terms of applying to those schools and being ready to apply to those schools. And for some of them, it would be enough, and for some, it would not be. So his parents wrote him the following letter. Dear Matt, on the night before you received your first college response, we wanted to let you know that we could not be any prouder of you than we are today. Whether or not you get accepted does not determine how proud we are and how proud we are of everything you have accomplished and the wonderful person you have become. That will not change based on what admissions officers decide about your future. We will celebrate with joy wherever you get accepted, and the happier you are with those responses, the happier we will be. But your worth as a person, as a student, and as our son is not diminished or influenced in the least by what these colleges have decided. If it does not go your way, you'll take a different route to get where you want. There is not a single college in this country that would not be lucky to have you, and you are capable of succeeding at any of them. We love you as deep as the ocean, as high as the sky, all the way around the world and back again, and to wherever you are headed, Mom and Dad. So what we ask of you is to remember that you are proud of your children. You are as excited and as nervous as they are about this process. And whatever happens will be okay, because we will help you and your student to work through any disappointments, and we will also celebrate with them as they get their exciting responses from their schools. We'd like you to take a moment and give us a little bit of feedback about our presentation and our programming tonight, so that we can continue to help you and your students to make sure that you are prepared. So if you would please take a minute and complete the survey. If you have questions, please email your child's school counselor directly so that we can respond to you about your specific situation or your child's specific questions. Thank you so much for coming.